Good afternoon, everyone. We'll get started momentarily. We just want to let the participants in the waiting room fully populate, then we'll get rolling. All right. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Greg Orton. I'm the National Director of the National Council of Asian Pacific Americans, a leading coalition of 46 of the largest Asian American, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander civil rights organizations around the country. We come to you today to talk about immigration and everything that I'm sure all of us are familiar with in watching the news. We have an executive branch overstepping, we have constitutional rights being trampled, and we felt that it was important to convene folks and bring us together to talk about what is happening and get the perspective of congressional leaders as well as community leaders in terms of what's happening on the ground, what can be done, and the current state of play. As many of you are familiar, recently Congress has passed a number of appropriation bills, but they are currently still grappling over questions on how to fund the Department of Homeland Security and ICE. I'm excited soon to introduce one of our guest speakers to provide their perspective on this. But before we get any further, I want to make sure everyone has an understanding that we are also bringing community perspective and members of NCAPA to share their perspectives on what is happening. And also from a data perspective, API data sharing their perspectives on public sentiment, community sentiment on, again, what's happening in the news. Now, before I turn it over to Congresswoman Meng, I want to just say thank you, everyone, for joining, recognizing that it's an incredibly challenging time. We're all feeling different things as we watch the news, fear, anger, disbelief, but it doesn't change the fact that if we choose to do nothing, this will simply continue. It is our job as community leaders, you all as community members, to figure out how we band together, how we challenge this, and make sure that our communities are protected. So again, thank you, everyone, for joining. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce Congresswoman Grace Meng, who serves New York's 6th Congressional District. She also serves as the chair of the Congressional Asian Pacific American Caucus to provide some opening remarks, and then I will potentially ask her a few questions as well. But before she speaks, I just want to recognize that the work that our members in Congress are doing every day to push back against this is incredibly important. They oftentimes don't receive enough love for the work that they're doing, but they are the ones holding the line here in Washington, D.C. And so we're very grateful to Congresswoman Meng, not just for being here today, but for the leadership that she shows every single day. Congresswoman?
Thanks so much, Greg, and thank you to the whole NCAPA team and family for including me in today's very important conversation. Thanks for the kind introduction and for hosting today's briefing and for everyone being on the call. And I hope that this is just one of many conversations that we will be having during these difficult times for our shared communities. Look, all of you, I'm so grateful. Your work is so critical right now to ensure that our communities remain informed and safe during these unprecedented and, quite frankly, dangerous times. Yesterday, many of our Democratic caucuses, from the Black Caucus, Hispanic Caucus, the Women's Caucus, from New Dems to Progressive Caucus, went to ICE headquarters to call on Secretary Noem to be removed and to demand justice and accountability. Thank you to our NCAPA members who joined us. It was a powerful reminder that we, as everyday Americans, are united in this fight for our liberties and collective freedoms. We are in an unfortunate situation because President Trump's big ugly law from last summer essentially gave ICE a blank check to terrorize our communities. As you probably know, that bill gave ICE $75 billion, $75 billion in new money with no strings attached. And that is 7 times ICE's annual budget. The president has emboldened a rogue agency with a massive slush fund, and we're seeing exactly what this agency is doing with that slush fund every day in our cities. Masked thugs are barging into private homes without warrants and kidnapping people off the streets based solely on their accent or appearance. And that's why House and Senate Dems have been unified in demanding accountability and oversight of ICE. We can't allow these so-called federal agents to act with impunity. That's why KPAC members stood unified in voting no on the DHS funding bill that was passed out of the House on January 22nd. Yesterday, Republicans narrowly passed the Senate amended funding bill that would fund five of the remaining appropriations bills for the rest of the fiscal year and provides just 2 weeks of funding for DHS. This 2 week long, what we call continuing resolution or CR, gives lawmakers, time is of the essence, very crucial time to hammer out specific oversight accountability measures that are technically in place but need to be followed to rein in the lawlessness of ICE and CBP. It's very important that this continuing resolution was limited to only 2 weeks. One tool that we have as the minority party is to use must-pass budget bills to enact oversight measures and prevent the misuse of funds by runaway agencies. And that's exactly what Senate Dems did when they negotiated this short-term CR so that we could have the opportunity to try our best to enact these guardrails. But I also wanted to be here to say thank you to you, the leaders of these groups, but also to your staff and your volunteers. I know that the advocacy has been incredibly difficult and frustrating and angering, especially this past year. And your voices have been essential in helping us to demand more accountability over ICE. I want to give a special shout out to one of our KPAC members, Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal. She has been a stalwart for not just for KPAC, but for the Democratic Caucus in traveling around the country, conducting hearings, including in Minnesota, and meeting with many of our leaders and our community members. But our caucus today is focused on working with our leadership and appropriators over the next 2 weeks so that we can enact the strongest oversight measures on DHS's immigration operations. We hope to work closely with you, but literally the time is ticking, the clock is ticking. We have 2 weeks to make sure our communities are safer. But thank you for having me.
Thank you. Thank you, Congresswoman. If you don't mind, I'd like to ask you a few questions because I know
Yeah.
that for many of the participants in this webinar, they have real concerns about what's happening and they see the news and they understand that Democrats are doing everything they can to provide that check on an executive branch that truly is running away with things. But if you could provide more insights into how that engagement with ICE or DHS has been for you all as a caucus, have you received responses? Do you have a sense of sort of where this conversation is going, especially as things seem to be escalating in many ways across the country?
It's not been great, I'll be honest. And I can't even blame it on party politics where they are not responsive to us, but maybe to our House Republican majority members, because that's not really been the case either. I will say, in case it's helpful, from a case by case basis, like casework back in our district offices, it's been a mixed bag, but a little bit more constructive and helpful. Every day our offices, I'm sure everyone's office, we're dealing with cases of families being separated, people being kidnapped, including people who are here legally, just going in for, checkups and American citizens. I had a constituent who was literally plucked off the TSA line at the airport. She was just going to another state. She's here legally. She has no criminal record, right? Not their quote unquote target. And she was literally plucked off the line because she wears a hijab and has dark skin, right? Like that's the only, and eventually sent to ICE in Louisiana. And we worked very hard with her family and we finally got her back home. So members every day are working on cases like this. And we're telling our local advocates when they are hearing about potential ICE agents being out in the community, they don't give us advance notice, right? They don't give Republicans advance notice either, not that I know of. But if your groups and your members hear of something, nothing's too small. They should not hesitate to reach out to our office. So this is very much on the local district, case by case. Again, mixed bag, but one family reunited is still better than zero. So every case we try our best. But in terms of response from the administration on many of these issues, we're trying to work more cohesively with our other caucuses. There's strength in numbers, strength in unity. We don't want them to pit one caucus against each other, which has often been done in the past. The Tri Caucus, which is the Black, Hispanic, and Asian caucus, this week we just sent a letter to Trump calling for a few things: firing of Secretary Noem, immediate suspension of ICE and CBP immigration enforcement operations in Minnesota, suspension of abusive ICE and CBP practices. It's not just ICE, it's potentially other sub-agencies as well. So suspension of these practices nationwide, and full independent investigations into these recent use of force incidents. Just being on camera is not enough. They need to do something about what we've seen, like, the footage from Renee Good and Alex Preddy. But they need to hold people accountable. Mandatory and timely cooperation with state and local law enforcement. And the fact that you can't just go into someone's private home without a warrant. We cannot overlook their lawlessness. And even Republicans are disturbed, right? After Alex Preddy, we saw Republicans weigh in. I was taking screenshot of every Republican. We had not seen that for most of last year. But our Hmong and other Southeast Asian communities in Minnesota, and I want to thank them for keeping us in the loop, are being harassed, right? As you all know, in their workplaces, in the parking lots, at Asian small businesses, supermarkets, schools, daycares, hospitals, sacred places, places of worship, and these places need to be protected. We're also working as a Tri-Caucus to demand that DHS withdraw its proposed public charge rule, which would replace a clear 2022 rule with very vague guidelines, putting the fate of millions of families in some arbitrary process. And if that rule goes through, as you know, many eligible immigrant families, they're not going to be able to get health insurance, food assistance, childcare programs. And so, we're trying to find out there. I'm not surprised, to be honest, that they haven't responded, but that's where public pressure still matters, right? We have seen the needle move, even though it's just a little bit and nowhere near enough. But it's because of the public, it's because of all your members. Thanks to widespread outrage, we saw Liam, right? And kudos to my colleague, Congressman Castro, the 5-year-old detained by ICE with his father was able to return home. But there's more Liams out there. It's not just one kid. And we are demanding that same accountability and pressure for so many of these other stories that aren't getting the same level of media attention, but are just as important, including our AA and HPI communities. So thank you, and please tell your members that KPAC members are very grateful for their advocacy.
Thank you, Congresswoman, and thank you especially for sharing your perspective on actions that we in community can take. I know that you have to run, but I just want to, again, token of appreciation for your leadership. We know this is an uphill fight that you're fighting for us. We know that you can't do it alone, and I appreciate that you actually close on the point that there's more we can do as community advocates, community leaders, everyday Asian American, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islanders to make sure these stories are being shared, to make sure that KPAC members have these anecdotal sort of stories and evidence that they can lean on to point to and really make their case that what is happening across this country is unacceptable and something that the caucus won't stand for. And so again, thank you again. We wish you the best and we'll certainly be in touch. Please extend this appreciation to all of your members of the caucus as well.
Yeah, and if I could just, end on something, you remember a few months ago the rhetoric about extending ACA care tax credits, they weren't necessarily a central or very popular, motivating talking point. But because the public and our caucus and everyone worked together, we made that an issue, right? And so just like now, we have 2 weeks to make sure that we use our opportunity and every tool at our disposal to make this a rallying cry and to make improvements. And of course, we know these things are already illegal, but we gotta do, we gotta put out the fire. Everything that we can do, even if we can just save that one more family from being separated or one more person from being kidnapped, it's absolutely important. And we need to make this because it's not just about the funding, right? Even without this money, they got their $75 billion, right? And they can operate exactly as they are. So it's critical that they are hearing from the public, and I'm hopeful that we can make that happen.
Very good. Powerful words, Congresswoman. Thank you again so much for joining us. I'd like now to turn it over to Karthik Ramakrishnan to provide perspective from a data angle in terms of what's happening. Again, public sentiment, community sentiment in terms of what's happening. Karthik has been an incredible leader within the coalition in helping us organize ourselves, pushing, always asking the right questions. So Karthik, always a pleasure to share space with you, and I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you, Greg, and thank you, Congressman Meng, and everyone else who is joining us from around the country. We had over 600 people sign up, and I see we have over 350 who are with us now, and many more who will get the recording after. I'm going to quickly go through some data, largely about where immigration opinion was in 2025, and you'll see that there was a big shift, and to look ahead on what we will likely see in the months to come. Next slide. So this is based on our general framework of DNA, data narrative action. And you can see in that QR code, or if you go to our main site and go to our blog, how this works, right? Survey data is important not in and of itself, but to make sure that we have more accurate narratives about our community and that it informs meaningful action. Let's go to the next slide. So one of the things we do, we have by now built up so much data that it might get a little confusing. People might get lost in our website. So what we've created are a set of resource guides, which you can find from the main page, including resources like By the Numbers Immigration. These are largely data points, but we give some context in terms of policies as well. And importantly, we have public opinion data as well as demographic and other program-related data on various issues. And we'll be rolling out more issues in the months to come and updating our existing resources like our immigration resource that we developed a year ago. Next slide. Now, one of the things we're doing more recently is to use opportunities like these webinars to pilot some new questions and also to get a sense of who's in the room. So we're going to have 3 polls that we're going to do in rapid succession. So if we can get the first one up, please. So while we're waiting for that, okay, so please do this very quickly. This is favorable to unfavorable on key individuals and agencies. So Donald Trump, DHS Secretary Kristi Noem, Democrats in Congress, Republicans in Congress, and then finally favorable or unfavorable on ICE or immigration and customs enforcement. So we'll give another 10 seconds for you to fill that out. And then we'll present the results and then move on to the next poll. So you got to get your fingers going very quickly here. This is not a scientific poll, but it does help us better understand who's in the room. And a couple of these questions are being piloted for future surveys that we'll be doing this year with a nationally representative population of APIs. Okay, so let's stop the poll and share the results if we can. Okay, so very unfavorable for Trump, Noem, mixed bag on Democrats in Congress, largely unfavorable on Republicans in Congress, and very unfavorable for ICE. Okay, let's go to the next poll. So this asks questions specific to deportations. And you'll see 4 different questions, or actually 5 different questions. So again, if you could move on this as quickly as you can. First question is about support or oppose on stopping all deportations and eliminating ICE. 2 is about deporting immigrants who have committed serious crimes. 3 is deporting undocumented immigrants who have committed minor crimes. 4 is deporting all undocumented immigrants. And then 5 is deporting legal immigrants who have committed serious crimes. So we'll give another 5 seconds on this. Okay, thank you for voting. Let's share the results. And by the way, we'll share this out later for those interested. So we see decent support for stopping all deportations and eliminating ICE. We see more support than opposition, although it seems close in terms of deporting undocumented immigrants with serious crimes. Opposition to those undocumented immigrants who've committed minor crimes. Deporting all undocumented immigrants, largely opposed and very strongly so. And then deporting legal immigrants who've committed serious crimes, mostly opposed, either somewhat opposed or strongly opposed. Thank you. Okay, and we're going to have one final question. We can get that up. And this is a new format, so hopefully you can rank it as the top, second, third, and fourth priority. On other matters related to immigration, which topic is the area of greatest concern? Suspending immigration from 75 countries, including 9 in Asia. Deporting immigrants who express views that the federal government does not agree with. Cutting down on student visas, and then imposing a $100,000 fee on new H-1B work visas. So ideally, you should be able to choose top, second, third, and fourth based on your rank order. And we'll give another 5 seconds there. Okay, let's see what the results show. Okay, so it looks like the issue of suspending immigration as well as deporting immigrants that who express views opposed to the federal government are higher on the priority list than when it comes to student visas and H-1B. Thank you all. These questions are new questions that we will test out in a future survey with NCAPA, and I'll say more about that in a minute. Let's go to the next slide. So we have some new data. Let's go to the next slide. This is brand new, and it'll be posted on apnorc.org/AAPI-data either later today or tomorrow. And what we were able to do with AP-NORC is to show a comparison in terms of API job approval for the president versus US adults more generally. And we see that Trump has lower job approval among APIs than the national average, 30% versus 40%. And low approval across the board, even though immigration looks like it's slightly higher approval, it's within the margin of error, which is about plus or minus 4.5%. Let's go to the next slide. Now on immigration, we saw a significant shift in 2025. Next slide. So if you look at survey results from March and September, these are surveys we did with the Associated Press and NORC. We saw that in March, about an even split between those favoring deporting all immigrants living in the country illegally, but that went down by September. We also had similar questions about immigrants convicted of a nonviolent crime in March, and we had a similar question about misdemeanors. And even though the questions are different, you can see a similar kind of pattern. So what accounts for that shift? Let's go to the next slide. One is, even when we asked this question in March, we saw that people were sensitive to the context. So in theory, they might have been split, or maybe 43% in that case, right, in favor of deporting all immigrants. But if you asked about child separation, if you asked about deportation in sensitive areas like churches and places of worship or in hospitals, you saw support went down significantly. Next slide. By the time August rolled around, and this comes up in our survey with NCAPA, the Policy Priority Survey, there's a strong sense that the Trump administration had overreached when it came to immigration, right? That they've gone too far on immigration enforcement as opposed to being on the right track. Next slide. And what accounted for that sense of going too far? We asked about particular tactics like using the military for immigration enforcement, um, doing immigration enforcement in public places such as parks and restaurants, like allowing immigration enforcement agents to wear full face masks and refuse to provide ID. We saw strong opposition on all of those factors. Next slide. In September, we asked additional questions with the Associated Press and NORC, including this question that many of you responded to right now: deporting immigrants living in the United States illegally who express views that the federal government does not agree with. And we saw strong opposition for these measures across the board, including among Vietnamese Americans. 66% opposed this policy. Next slide. We also saw significant opposition on this measure across age groups, but particularly among those age 18 to 34. And you see that the opposition is much stronger among Democrats than among Republicans, with independents being split. By the way, you can find all of this opinion data when you go to our website and you click on surveys and go to the particular months in which we've done these surveys. Next slide. In terms of covering face masks, I'd shown the summary results before, but you see opposition to be particularly strong among those age 18 to 34 and among Democrats. But importantly, when you look at that API figure, right, 52% strongly opposed, 16% somewhat opposed, you add those together and you get 68% opposed, right? Net opposed. Next slide. In terms of using the military and National Guard, you see significant opposition again and patterns that are familiar, especially in terms of age and party ID. Next slide. In terms of next steps, we'll be asking additional questions on immigration and economic hardship. That will be released in late March of 2026 in our partnership with the Associated Press and NORC at the University of Chicago. We will also be asking additional questions on immigration, economy, healthcare, and other key themes that are part of NCAPA's policy priorities. And this is a set of priorities and themes across the entire NCAPA coalition. And these themes include affordability, belonging in America, democratic rights and freedoms, and opportunity. So we hope you will join us in future events. And let's go to the final slide. And please follow us so you can sign up for our newsletter where we provide updates on our studies as we release them. And you can also follow us on social media. Thank you.
All right, so moving us on to the next segment of our programming today. Hi, folks. I'm Joanne Pano. I'm the Policy Director on staff with NCAPA. Again, many thanks to you all for joining us for today's community briefing, focused on such a timely conversation given today's climate and the decisions that are being made impacting our API community, about the fight and the long road ahead of us. So for this segment of our programming, I'm proud to welcome our coalition, who have all been tirelessly advocating. We'll discuss local needs and advocacy efforts amidst immigration communities, essentials to basic needs such as access to affordable health care, rollbacks to civil rights protections, changes in public safety, and an outlook on 2026. For folks who have dropped questions to the chat, please keep them coming, and we'll be sure to follow up with folks after today's event. So joining us for our community panel today are Kamua, National Deputy Director with CIRAC, Adam Carbolito, Director of Policy and Advocacy with APCHO. Adam's also our co-chair of NCAPA's Health Committee and a member of our Language Access Working Group. Sina Weepy, Director of National Policy and Advocacy with EPIC and lead of NCAPA's Immigration and Health Committees. Sina is also co-chair of our Data Equity Working Group here at NCAPA. Linda Fan, Director of Public Policy with API GBV. Marna Malkor, Senior Federal Policy Manager with the SIC Coalition and co-chair of NCAPA's Civil Rights Committee. And Youngwoo Han, Organizing Director with NACASEC and a member of NCAPA's Immigration Committee. Welcome, y'all, and thanks so much for being here. So let's go ahead and just get right into it. I'm starting with you, Com. CREC has been a leading national advocacy organization working alongside Southeast Asian leaders, including community members in Minnesota. Could you share with us more today about what you've learned are some of the most pressing needs from members of the Southeast Asian community and what those look like amidst enforcement operations from immigration?
Yeah, thank you, Joanne, so much for inviting us to be part of this. Really quickly, I think it's important to just get a little bit of context on Southeast Asian American communities before talking about some of the needs that they're facing. I think under this administration, we know that they've deported between January and October of last year more Southeast Asian Americans than under any other presidency in one fiscal year. In fact, for Laotians and Hmong people and other folks from Laos, they've deported more Hmong folks than under any presidency. And they've deported more Hmong people within just that 10-month time frame than we have between 1998 and 2023. So it's been a huge increase in the number of people who are being removed, the type of people they're going after. And one of the things that we are seeing in Minnesota and hearing from our partners, and just a really quick shout out to the Southeast Asian organizations who are really doing this work on the ground, folks like the Coalition of Asian American Leaders, MMA, Hmong American Partnership, the Lao Center of Minnesota, and our partners over at the Southeast Asian Freedom Network. A lot of what we're seeing is that they're going door to door, racially profiling and asking for Hmong and other Asian Americans. We know that they're loitering in the community spaces within our communities, at shopping centers, at workplaces and community centers. In fact, some of our partners at Hmong American Partnership and Hmong National Development and Cal have had their staff stopped or have seen their staff incredibly afraid to just go into the office because of immigration and customs enforcement. And we've just seen a huge uptick in the number of people who are being detained. In fact, one of the things that we're hearing is that folks are being really quickly detained and then moved to Texas. And so there's now this strange, gap in services for folks who are in Minnesota who may have an attorney in Minnesota, but now need to also scramble and find an attorney and a trusted attorney in Texas. One of the major challenges for this community is that there's such specific needs because about 80% of Southeast Asian Americans who are facing removal because of some prior contact with the criminal legal system. So you're looking specifically for attorneys who have both knowledge in the immigration system, but also the criminal justice system and how those sort of intertangle and intertwine. And so it's been particularly difficult. I think our partners are looking for trusted attorneys, both in Minnesota and in Texas. They're looking for more know your rights materials. Luckily, some of our partners have been able to put out audio know your rights, but we know that that's a continued need for our communities because a lot of Southeast Asian Americans don't necessarily read and write in their native languages. For example, for older Hmong Americans, a lot of them are unable to read or write in Hmong and require audio interpretation in order to understand the information. Some of the other things that we're hearing is just money, quite frankly. I mean, a lot of people right now are sheltering in place. There's a large request for folks to chip into fundraisers and mutual aid support that's happening in Minnesota. We recently put out a joint statement with some of our Minnesota partners that lists a few different mutual aid fundraisers, specifically targeting Asian American and Pacific Islander communities in the state. I think I've also heard that APIP is also, doing a fundraiser specifically to support Minnesotans who are of Asian American descent. One, last thing in terms of need, I mean, this isn't a direct need from impacted folks, but just a general movement need is that, one of the things that we've seen is that, until there were some of the major cases involving Southeast Asian Americans, and specifically the two cases involving the older Hmong gentleman who was taken out of his home in the middle of the night in just his underwear and detained. And then the Hmong asylum seeker who was detained and then left in Houston when she was released after a 2-week detention period that required her family to go down to Houston to pick her up. Um, Before those cases, we've seen that Asian Americans were largely glossed over in the immigration narrative, despite the fact that this is, there's been specific racial profiling of Hmong Americans and Southeast Asian Americans in the state. So much of the conversation had focused specifically on Minneapolis, and for good reason, but it doesn't mean that we need to leave Asian Americans and Southeast Asian Americans out of this narrative at large, the way that we've seen over this past month.
Thanks so much, Com, for sharing your insights and for highlighting those stories that don't always make it into the major media. So appreciate your thoughts there. Shifting gears here for a moment, we know that healthcare is a fundamental need, and considering the implementation of federal policies related to healthcare coverage, we know that affordable access to healthcare continues to be a primary concern for so many families across our communities. Adam, could you tell us more about the anticipated changes that will go into effect later this year, and how will this directly impact immigrant communities?
Yeah, thanks, Joanne. And I think, you're absolutely right. Healthcare affordability and just the ability to access care in general has been significantly deteriorated over the last year or so. And especially for immigrant communities, it's going to be a major challenge. By the end of this year, unless an individual is a green card holder, a Cuban or Haitian migrant, or an individual from one of the Compact of Free Association countries, Micronesia, Palau, and the Marshall Islands, your ability to get healthcare coverage in this country is going to be dramatically constrained. At the start, and this is all stems from the big, beautiful bill that Republicans passed last year, also known as reconciliation. And several of the provisions are already in place. That bill took out over $1 billion from the healthcare sector, largely impacting immigrant communities and low-income individuals. Upon enactment of that bill, unless you are a green card holder, Cuban, Haitian migrant, or COFA citizen, you were no longer eligible to get SNAP benefits, or you could not enroll in Medicare once you reach retirement age. At the end of December of this year, if you weren't in one of those categories, you couldn't get subsidized enhanced subsidies for the ACA marketplace. And if you made less than 100% of the federal poverty line, you also could not get those enhanced subsidies. In October of this year, and I think this is the major one for many in our community, an individual who is not a green card holder, Cuban Haitian migrant from a COFA country, will no longer be eligible to enroll in Medicaid or CHIP. Which is the federal insurance program for low-income individuals and those who are underserved. And at the end of December of this year, subsidized ACA coverage would also be restricted to those immigration categories. And so those are the direct statutory constraints that Congress has enacted as part of the president's agenda. But this is part of a broader culture of fear that I think is being instilled within the healthcare setting, and is part of other actions that the administration has also taken to restrict coverage. At the beginning of the Trump administration, DHS rescinded what was known as the Protected Areas Memo, which was guidelines that generally prohibited immigration enforcement in areas that were deemed sensitive because of their the essential benefit that they provided to communities. These are places like churches, places like playgrounds and schools, and healthcare facilities like community health centers that APCHO represents. And the rescission of that guidance means that there are no longer those general prohibitions for when ICE can conduct immigration enforcement at those areas. We haven't heard of immigration enforcement at healthcare facilities, but we know that they're targeting schools. We see news reports on that on a daily basis. We know that they're entering courthouses in order to take immigrants who are on their way to their immigration proceedings. And that is a huge detriment to the ability of individuals from a healthcare setting to seek the care that they need. Secondly, the middle of last year, the president withdrew or signed an executive order that made English as the official language, and part of that was the removal of language access protections for that federal agencies are required to provide, that used to be required to provide. Thankfully, Congresswoman Grace Meng has introduced legislation that would codify some of those requirements for federal agencies, and we hope that Congress will act on this. And the last thing that I'll say is Congresswoman Meng also mentioned the public charge rule. What DHS is doing is taking away bright lines that generally made it so that individuals who utilize federal public benefits like Medicaid, like SNAP, that the utilization of those programs wouldn't affect their ability to come into this country or wouldn't affect their ability to get their green card. We know that the public charge rule is causing immense fear in our communities as it's being proposed because of fear that it'll jeopardize an individual's immigration status. Congresswoman Jayapal has introduced legislation that would help to get rid of some of this. The Heal for Immigrant Families Act and the Lift the Bar Act are both bills that she is sponsoring. They have Senate co-sponsors. And again, we hope that Congress is going to act on these measures because they're absolutely critical to our community's ability to get health care in this country.
Thanks so much, Adam. Appreciate you really providing us with that glimpse of just how the reconciliation bill itself will continue to constrain those lifelines for our communities. So speaking of public charge and healthcare and access to life-saving care and supports, we know that public charge continues to be a major concern for many API families across the country. This question's for you, Sina. Could you share about the harmful narratives that are currently out there, and how are these impacting Pacific Islander communities?
Thank you so much, Joanne, and malo lele, everyone. I first want to acknowledge the Indigenous Anacostia and Piscataway lands I'm on. Second, I'd like to acknowledge Dr. Bonibate Rokolekutu, an esteemed Itauke, or Indigenous Fijian leader and professor of Pacific Island Studies in California, who recently spoke on this topic, and is someone who is held in high regard and respect at EPIC. With his guidance and permission, I'd like to share what these harmful narratives around public charge creates and means for the Fijian community. With the recent immigrant visa suspension on 75 countries, which includes Fiji, and is directly tied to concerns about applicants being likely to become a public charge, it's important to consider framing, impact, and historical context. The framing public charge presents dehumanizes and demoralizes Fijians by labeling them as economic burdens and disregards the essential work and care they provide to the care economy in the US. It denies their dignity and reinforces a moral hierarchy that marks them suspect and undeserving. It also negates the purpose, sacrifice, and opportunity of why they migrate here in the first place, to gain access and become economically independent. I resonate deeply with this because it's the same reasons why my own family came here from Tonga and Samoa. It also erases the contributions they make to the care economy and remains highly undervalued and rarely recognized as economic value. Many Fijians work in caregiving, in-home care, nursing facilities, and hospice support. To put things into perspective, they are the last people to care for people before they pass away, and they do so with the utmost love, care, and respect they pour into the physical and emotional labor that comes with it. The ways in which they approach this work is important to recognize. You can't put a price on that kind of humanity and dignity. I know this as fact because I've witnessed it firsthand as the daughter of a former caregiver. Additionally, as Fijians work to provide for their families here and pay their taxes, they also send remittances back home to Fiji. The public charge narrative erases this reality too. Those remittances addresses financial scarcity and comes in second to tourism to help sustain the economy and support families. Historical context always matters, and the US has played a significant role as an imperial power that has structured the migration and marginalization of Fijians. During World War II, Fiji served as a refueling space for the US military. Fijians and many Pacific Islanders have contributed to this and continue to do so as we remain to have the highest recruitment rate of service members enlisted in the military. That reality needs to be recognized as well as another form of erasure and undermining of the public charge narrative. Calling them burdens is not neutral policy language. It is demoralizing and derogatory, and it continues a long history of deciding whose lives have value and those that are not. Reminding and restoring visibility and accountability of these examples of impact must continue to be uplifted as much as possible. Understanding this helps us see that public charge is not just about paperwork, it's about power, dignity, and whose humanity is recognized. Thank you, Joanne.
Thanks so much, Sina. Really appreciate you uplifting the dignity and respect that our caregivers deserve every day and the value of their presence and contributions. As we consider different subpopulations within our community and who is impacted and how, the administration's mass deportation campaign has disproportionately impacted women and girls, especially for survivors of domestic violence and sexual violence. Advocacy support services are critically needed for individuals and families who are struggling to navigate immigration systems and the processes that are in place. Turning this over to you, Linda, could you tell us more about API-GBV's work and the changes and impacts that you're seeing in public safety?
Yeah, thank you so much for that question and the opportunity to join this conversation to share a little bit about the Asian Pacific Institute on Gender-Based Violence, or API-GBV. We essentially provide training, technical assistance, and policy advocacy to support roughly over 185 AA and HPI organizations that every day serve survivors of domestic violence, sexual assault, and trafficking. We also work very close in solidarity with the MENA population and other immigrant communities, and we also have leadership roles in multiple national gender-based violence coalitions to essentially push for policies and best practices that's responsive to our communities. Right now, what we're seeing is not simply an immigration over-enforcement issue. What we're really seeing is the destabilization and dismantling of public safety systems that victim advocates and communities alongside Congress have spent decades building to protect survivors. And this includes things such as like law enforcement responses to abuse, access to protective orders or other civil legal protections, survivor-based immigration relief, and as others have already stated earlier, the broader safety net that provides food, shelter, and economic stability for many of those who are trying to leave abusive situations. So right now, immigration enforcement practices are making it very, very difficult for survivors to safely engage those systems. And when survivors cannot safely report violence, the general public safety itself is compromised because these are very serious crimes. Abusers are really using this moment to weaponize against immigrant survivors. Advocates are hearing abusers tell immigrant survivors, if you call the police, I will call ICE, or they're saying you have no rights here. And we have heard really heartbreaking stories of children who are being sexually abused, being told that their parents could be deported if they disclose. So in this climate, what we're seeing is those threats really carry a significant amount of weight. Right now, many survivors in our communities are running through the risk scenario of reporting a crime. So if they're thinking, if I call law enforcement, will my partner be detained? What will happen if we lose someone who's bringing the income that, the children are depending on? Or will they be picked up? And what's going to happen to their family? So it's no surprise that survivors are choosing not to call because seeking help really feels dangerous at this moment. And in regards to the chilling effect, which we've heard earlier as well, we are seeing fewer reports to law enforcement, hesitation to seek protective orders, overall reluctance in trying to access services from either a domestic violence or a sexual assault shelter, or trying to access public benefits, right? Like we heard before, even when they are legally eligible for them. I will say though that I previously served as the policy director at the Office on Violence Against Women at DOJ and spent a good, I don't know, 14, 15 years serving as an executive director of a domestic and sexual violence organization in Texas. So I've dealt my fair share in regards to understanding the local impact of like 287G agreements and restrictive state policies. But I will say, like, in the nearly 30 years I've been in this field, I've not seen the level of survivors going this far underground. Additionally, we're also seeing enforcement actions that disregard protections embedded in the Violence Against Women's Act. So VAWA includes explicit confidentiality safeguards and carefully constructed pathways for survivors seeking immigration relief through whether it's like a VAWA self-petition, a U visa, or a T visa. And we're seeing enforcement actions that sweep up survivors pursuing lawful relief. You've already heard about, picking up folks at immigration courts, but we're also seeing ICE presence at domestic violence courts, such as the one incident that happened in Chicago, and then also ICE patrolling outside of DV shelters, which these are locations that have long been recognized as sensitive and protected. And honestly, when enforcement occurs in these spaces, it really does undermine the very protections Congress enacted to encourage reporting or cooperation, and really seeking accountability for abusers. So as a result, the overall gender-based violence field, we are now spending a significant amount of time educating organizations on safety planning, not only for their clients, but for themselves as well. So we're doing a lot of deep dives into protecting confidential client information, how to respond if enforcement's happening near their shelter, and just like everybody else, just giving folks know your rights information so that they can prepare for potential raids. Honestly, I don't think this is where the field needs to be spending their time. They need to be focusing on the individual needs of clients, but this is where we are. And beyond the enforcement practices, we're also concerned about detention conditions. There is significant increase of risk of sexual harassment and assault in the facilities. And this affects everyone in custody, but it is definitely acute for LGBTQ individuals. And there's also heightened health and safety risks for families and with children and for pregnant, nursing, or postpartum women. So the detention doesn't create safety at all, as we all know. All it does is really compound trauma. And, I would be really remiss not to mention this other point, which is, this is all happening while at the same time we are seeing new illegal grant conditions placed on Department of Justice and Health and Human Services grants that prohibit the use of funds to serve undocumented immigrants. And this have caused significant confusion in the gender-based violence field. Organizations, both culturally specific and mainstream, have taken down resources and scaled back services out of fear of noncompliance, even though these conditions contravene existing statutes. And that instability just further weakens the safety net for immigrant survivors. And we're currently litigating a lot of those cases, but the retraction of services have already begun. So the things we're really pressing for this moment and working with Congress is we are wanting for ICE and other federal agents to be clearly identifiable and unmasked, right? We're seeing troubling reports of individuals impersonating ICE officers who have used this opportunity of perceived authority to harass or assault victims. And we're also asking Congress to hold DHS in prohibiting, again, enforcement at sensitive locations, essentially use that $75 billion that's already in the bank to help shore up and enforce the protections under the Violence Against Women's Act. Essentially, we are requesting a firewall for individuals with pending survivor-based claims, that they are protected from any enforcement. And then, of course, implement detention facility safeguards, including upholding the Prison Rape Elimination Act standards.
Thank you so much, Linda. Sorry to
Sure.
You're
I was about to say my last thing was we definitely want to make sure, we're not asking our community members to kind of choose between safety and survival. But thank you so much.
Thanks, Linda, and appreciate folks bearing with us. We're likely going to go over, given the amount of information and knowledge that we're going to be sharing. So please bear with us, and we'll be sure to share resources, especially as we close out. But still wanted to make sure that we have time here for our two final speakers. As we talk about civil rights protections here for a moment, we've seen that reduction in civil rights and the lack of oversight from federal agencies across the board, including DHS's Office for Civil Rights and Civil Liberties. Manirmal, could you share why were these particular offices created and what has scaling back on their operations meant for immigrant communities?
Absolutely. Thank you, Joanne. DHS's Office for Civil Rights and Civil Liberties was established by the Homeland Security Act of 2002. That's the same statute that established DHS. According to law passed by Congress, the office is responsible for reviewing and assessing information alleging abuses of civil rights and investigating complaints of civil rights and civil liberties abuses by DHS personnel like ICE agents. It has investigated things like disabled detainees not being able to access care and reports of sexual assault in ICE detention centers. Last March, Secretary No moved to shut down DHS's Civil Rights and Civil Liberties Office and fired most of its 150-person staff. About 600 active abuse investigations were halted when that happened. It didn't happen in a vacuum. This is one of many civil rights offices that this administration has tried to dismantle through these mass firings. In May, after being sued, the DHS announced that it would not abolish the office, but according to public reporting that came at the end of last year, there were still only 9 people employed in the Civil Rights and Civil Liberties Office. Formerly, it was 150 people before the March firings. And the DHS bill that thankfully was blocked would have significantly reduced funding for the office, also more or less solidifying the administration's effort to diminish it. Losing these kinds of offices means that the individuals who experience violations at the hands of federal agents have one less avenue for seeking justice. For this to come at a time when we just saw the highest annual deaths in ICE custody in 2 decades, and with 8 people dying either in ICE detention or after being shot by immigration agents in the first month of this year alone, is unacceptable. There is a recent example that our organization experienced. I won't go into too much detail just for the sake of time, but we had submitted an inquiry early last year in March about allegations of 6 who were deported, their civil rights being violated, them being shackled for 36 hours, allegedly, according to public reporting, their articles of faith being thrown away in the trash while they were being deported. We just got a letter back from DHS's Office of Civil Rights and Civil Liberties last week, so about 10 months out, just telling us that they wouldn't be doing anything further on that matter. So I think that's just one example of, it's hard to overstate the egregiousness of the kinds of violations that are more likely to go uninvestigated when we don't have these kinds of offices. And when they go uninvestigated, they're more likely to happen again. And that's not something we can accept.
Thanks so much, Manirmal. I'm just hearing about all the advocacy work that you and the SIG Coalition are continuing to pursue, especially on behalf of SIG communities, is really astounding. So thank you for sharing that. Lastly, just wanted to talk more broadly about immigration and the outlook on 2026. NACASEC has been a leading partner in the immigration space, working on a number of campaigns, such as those focused on protecting DACA, advancing the Adoptee Citizenship Act, and ensuring citizenship for all. Youngwoo, curious, where are you seeing the toughest fights ahead in 2026?
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having NACASEC on here. NACASEC's work is always evolving to meet the moment. But our mission stays the same, building power with immigrant communities and making sure all of us, regardless of our immigration status, can live with dignity, safety, and belonging. The way we see it with 180 billion passed for the immigration enforcement this last summer, and as the immigration enforcement's capacity is growing, whether it is increasing the number of beds to detain immigrants or agents, we predict that around this summer would be the time where they reach its peak capacity, that the new funding enables them. And that means that the immigration enforcement would get much worse before it gets any better. With the ongoing fight in Congress to stop further appropriations to DHS, it is critical for all of our communities that this paramilitary group like ICE and CBP do not get one more cent, and also claw back the money that was given through the reconciliation and also held accountable as any of our agencies would. On the national level, our campaign focus is clear. What got us here won't get us there. So we have to bring in and engage with the people who have often stayed on the sideline, whether it is small business owners, young Asian men, or faith communities, and show that the immigrant rights are everyone's fight. And at NACASEG, we are trying to figure out more innovative way to engage with those who previously have not engaged with us or with the movement. So we are leaning into storytelling and creative media through things like podcasts, art competitions. Finally, we are working closely with our national immigration rights organizing partners. We are part of deeper strategic conversations about movement power, how to inflict higher disruption cost on the system of oppression while minimizing concession cost for them. Additionally, we are part of also efforts preparing for mass mobilization around key dates, such as Labor Day, the May Day, the World Cup, and of course, 2026 elections. How to leverage these moments where we get the world's attention to demand a better, world for all of our immigrant communities. These aren't just moments of visibility; they are opportunities to anchor long-term base building and narrative change. And lastly, it goes without saying that the midterm election will be also one of more critical fights this year. Not only in choosing a candidate that shares values and visions for the immigrant community, but also with the election integrity, an effort to dismantle the integrity and infrastructure of the election is already well underway. And it is critical that the organizations like us and the community members, especially those with the privilege, stay vigilant and in ensuring keeping our election safe and transparent. Thank you.
Thanks, Kyung-woo. And thank you so much to all of our panelists for sharing your thoughts, lending your expertise here with us today, and for your continued leadership in the fight ahead. To close us out here, folks, and again, we appreciate folks for staying on beyond 4 o'clock. You've heard about the different ways that immigration continues to be front and center for our communities as our communities navigate the complexities of immigration policies and systems that are in place, from enforcement to healthcare to care workers to public safety to the need for civil rights protections and accountability, and how we should be pushing our members of Congress. Thanks so much to Greg, Chair Meng, Karthik, Kam, Adam, Sina, Linda, Manarmal, and Young-woo. And thank you to you all for tuning in and joining us today. A few things to close us out as we wrap up. Folks from our team will be dropping the following resources into the chat. Stay with us in the fight as we advocate for our communities by visiting NCAPA's Policy and Advocacy Toolkit. Within the pages of our toolkit that you'll find on our website, we have step-by-step how-tos, such as how to reach out to your member of Congress, how to share your story, and others. We also have an updated immigration fact sheet that covers details on our communities, recent polling, as well as how federal funds are being spent on immigration enforcement. We've got a compiled list of Know Your Rights resources from both national and local partners. Definitely encourage folks to share that and share out with your networks. And then lastly, if you haven't already subscribed to our newsletter, we encourage you to do so and to share it with your colleagues and friends. Through our newsletter, you'll receive our weekly state of update from our policy team here in DC that we generate each week, including federal updates from the White House to the Hill, as well as information on our upcoming events and webinars. Take care and stay safe, everyone. Thanks, and we'll see you at the next one.